The Mojave Desert, California. White hot sun on a parched and empty land. A place seemingly fit only for snakes and lizards, as hostile as any on Earth. But the Mojave is a complex habitat, rich in highly specialized plant and animal life, and as fragile as any crystal garden. Life in the desert is a life of extremes, where a creosote bush by a sun-baked rock makes a feast for a desert iguana. Familiarity with the desert breeds affection. Those who know the Mojave well love it fiercely. None more so than Dr. Robert Stebbins, a zoologist who has devoted his long life to understanding this place and its inhabitants.
It's very difficult for me to tell people how deeply I feel about the desert or any wild place, but especially the desert because I've spent so much time here and have had so much enjoyment. It's like trying to describe to someone one's feeling for a very dear human being. The longest journey starts with one step. Learn about the Joshua tree. And I assure you, if you get interested enough to do that, you are going to discover other things associated with the Joshua tree. Pretty soon you know 2 species, 3 species. Pretty soon you begin to sense the marvel of these living systems out here.
An ancient nomadic people left their mark here. These rock carvings are evidence of a culture to whom the native and sometimes deadly creatures of the Mojave were the core and substance of their lives. The native people have mostly gone, vanished into prehistory. Now, from just beyond the desert's parched and rocky hills, the Mojave feels the pressure of 35 million resource-hungry Americans. 5 major highways penetrate its interior. For most of today's travelers, the contorted shapes of the Joshua tree are merely the backdrop to an air-conditioned journey from city to city. The tree was named by Mormon settlers who rumbled their way through here in their covered wagons. They saw its branches as the open arms of Joshua beckoning them ever westward. The desert and its primitive images were the inspiration for the band U2 and their album, The Joshua Tree, one of the most successful records of all time. And it's their songs that celebrate a desert that, despite its harshness, is an exhilarating triumph of life. The Joshua tree is a fitting symbol for the Mojave, for it grows only within the 25 million acres of largely public land that define this desert. 25 species of birds are known to nest in this giant yucca. The red-tailed hawk is not unique to the Mojave. Unlike the Joshua tree, its range extends throughout the United States. Two families share this tree. While the hawks nest in the crown formed by the arms of the tree, a ladderback woodpecker pounds out its nest in the pulpy trunk. Within the safety of the hole, The woodpecker parents raise their chicks on a diet of grubs and other insects. Higher up the tree, the hawks bring their offspring larger food, small mammals, lizards, and snakes. The female tears these apart before offering them to the chicks. In courtship, the male hawk often passes prey to his mate in flight. This American kestrel also brings food to his mate in the Joshua tree. He's probably trying to attract her to an abandoned woodpecker hole as a nest site. Darkness sinks across the desert. Creatures that survived the heat of the day below ground begin to stir. The tiny desert night lizard lives under and around the fallen branches and trunks of the Joshua tree. In summer, it emerges after dark to feed on termites and other tiny insects. They have to be tiny. The lizard is barely 2 inches long. This night snake is only 18 inches nose to tail, but it's big enough to feed on the little night lizards. The night snake is mildly venomous, which helps to slow the struggles of its prey. It gulps down the lizard in minutes. Reptiles are not alone on the nighttime desert floor. This scorpion has wiled away the searing heat of the day under rocks or hidden in a cool burrow. But darkness is no protection against those unlikely predators who may want to eat a scorpion. The pallid bat has sensitive hearing. It can detect the whisper of the scorpion's tiny footsteps on the sand. The scorpion attempts to sting the bat. Often the bat bites the sting clean off. This time, it flutters back to its roost with the living scorpion clinging to its wing. The night snake continues to inch across the desert sand. This time, it ends up with just a snack. The lizard's tail is designed to break off easily. The snake swallows the still wriggling tail while the lizard flees and survives. Specialized muscles quickly contract to prevent blood loss. In a few months, it will grow a new tail. As dawn creeps across the Mojave, hunting and feeding intensify. Soon the rising temperatures will make life in the open unbearable for most. A coyote prowls the desert, an opportunistic hunter ready to pounce on any small animal. It may have only a scant 3 hours in the cool of the morning to range the rocks looking for food. Not all animals are easy prey for the coyote. This desert tortoise, heaving itself from its burrow into the morning, is a perfectly adapted desert inhabitant. As big as a motorcycle helmet, the adult tortoise can protect itself by retreating beneath its armored plating. The tortoise only appears above ground for an hour or two each day. usually in the cool of the early morning. It's a vegetarian that will eat almost any plant, fresh or dry. It rarely wanders far from its burrow, and much of its time is spent feeding. During hard times, tortoises fast for months, surviving on stores of water and fat within their bodies. Tortoises are sometimes as old as they look, living for over 70 years. The opposite of the slow tortoise is the swift roadrunner. During the chilly desert nights, the roadrunner's temperature drops by several degrees to conserve vital energy. As the sun rises, the roadrunner basks like a reptile to regain lost heat without drawing on its stores of body fat. It arches its wings forward to expose a black downy patch on its back. The patch absorbs heat quickly and speeds up the warming of its muscles. As a mainly ground-living bird, the roadrunner needs speed to avoid danger. But, unlike in cartoons, coyotes seldom chase roadrunners. Coyotes are too smart to waste precious energy on a bird whose top ground speed is 20 miles an hour. The roadrunner uses its speed and agility to snatch up small prey. Patrolling its territory, the roadrunner flicks its tail to expose a bright black and white pattern. This signaling may confuse possible predators and also alerts other roadrunners. These birds are highly territorial and methodically patrol the boundaries of their home ground. When challenged, they can defend it vigorously. Roadrunners may be too fast for coyotes, but another ground-living bird, Gambel's quail, is easier prey. The quail bustle about on the ground, lacking the roadrunner's spurt of speed to keep them safe from the jaws of the ever-hungry coyote. At full tilt, the roadrunner is even able to catch one of the swiftest of lizards, a desert whiptail, in what looks like a series of controlled crashes. It's easy to see why coyotes just don't bother. The roadrunner is one of the desert's success stories. It's a type of cuckoo, although unlike its more familiar relatives, it does raise its own chicks. Young chicks are very quiet. They don't want to reveal their location to predators. Even within the spiny protection of the cholla, the chicks are vulnerable to marauding coyotes. But not all the desert's inhabitants have to be so concerned about making a noise. Coyotes howl, tortoises bang against each other. Male desert tortoises fight to establish their position in a pecking order. A rival male provokes noisy, violent behavior, totally out of character with the usual passive progression from plant to plant. He butts his rival in an attempt to establish his dominance, and the nods seem to mean he is definitely serious about it. He attempts to bite his opponent, but tortoises rarely draw blood. One tortoise may flip his rival onto his back, but then may inadvertently help him to regain his feet by repeated ramming with his shell. If the tortoises are equally matched, these encounters can go on for an hour. But in this contest, it's not long before the smaller tortoise gets the message and retreats with as much speed and dignity as his shape and weight will allow. In fact, it's time for both to head for cover. The sun is high and the temperature rising. It won't be long before the ground is too hot to touch, even for those scaly feet. For this soft-bodied caterpillar, it is a finely judged race against the sun. Even a few extra minutes of exposure will mean certain death. It digs a burrow and sits out the red-hot middle of the desert day under the sand. In warm weather, this time of day is too hot for most animals in the Mojave to survive without shelter or shade.
As you look around here, you might get the impression that there's not much here that could be damaged by off-road driving or other kinds of human activities, but in actual fact, vehicular activity in a place like this can be seriously damaged if it's chronic, if people use the area extensively. And that comes about because the bushes get broken down, the crust that guards the desert against blowing dust gets broken, animal burrows are crushed, some animals are killed right on the spot. Some people have the idea, well, the animals can just go somewhere else, but that usually doesn't happen. If they do go somewhere else, those areas are usually occupied and the animal is lost and has trouble finding food and shelter. So a heavy impact in an area like this can be seriously damaging to the living system.
The human pressure of the staggering population explosion in the desert southwest of the United States has created a hunger for space and resources. It's fun to be free, and open spaces have always challenged the human spirit. But the damage to some parts of the Mojave has been devastating. These riders are within their designated areas, but far too many others ignore boundaries and tear across the fragile desert. Already over 25,000 miles of roads and tracks scar the Mojave. Because of increasing human damage, there is strong pressure for parts of California's desert to be given national park status. Until now, damage by vehicles has been largely overlooked in the excitement and challenge of man and machine against nature. Thrilling for the riders, but desert life suffers. The noise deafens lizards and rodents, destroying their defenses against predators. Spinning tires grind up plants and crush animals in their burrows. The thin crust that holds the surface together is broken down and blows in the desert wind. The specialized plant and animal life of dunes remain damaged for years, even for decades. Some areas may never recover. The silent, seamless dunes of the Mojave cannot survive as racetracks. These are more than beautiful wind-sculptured piles of sand. They support a complex and highly adapted population of plants and animals, and it's certain more remain to be discovered and described. The birdcage evening primrose flowers where few other plants can even survive, sending down long roots into deep layers of moist sand. Sphinx moth larvae can live on the dunes chiefly because of these evening primroses. They obtain food and moisture from the flowers and then retreat underground, but not just to avoid the heat. This larva will reappear as the adult moth. The highly specialized dune cricket has bristles along its hind legs that enable it to shovel out large quantities of sand. The fringe-toed lizard has specially shaped scales along its toes to enable it to dash over loose sand. Like all desert inhabitants, it too needs to avoid the desiccating sun and wind. It swims beneath the sand surface like an eel moving through soft mud. Perhaps the most extraordinary method of traveling over loose sand is that of the Sidewinder, a type of rattlesnake. It crawls sideways, throwing loops of its body forward and skips over the dune. It leaves a distinct, sinuous track, a series of J's which tell the direction of its travel, the natural traces of a creature moving in sympathy with the desert. Most other snakes have greater difficulty in negotiating a dune. The Sidewinder has found a way to do it at great speed. It exists on one of the desert's most difficult terrains with an elegance in harmony with the spirit of the Mojave. Rain, when it sweeps across the Mojave Desert, is often sudden, brief, and violent. On average, only 2 inches of rain a year falls in the Mojave. In some years, none comes at all. Rain triggers seeds that may have lain dormant in the soil for up to 30 years. Generous rains in late autumn mean an explosion of color, a glory of desert bloom. This recent opulent flowering of desert poppies, dandelions, and lupins hasn't been seen for 20 years. The desert tortoise takes full advantage of this sudden glut of food. It's an all too brief respite from its usual diet of dryer fare. Gorging on desert dandelions like a fabled lotus eater, it builds up enough fat and water to see it through the next few months. Last winter's rains have created a tortoise paradise. Other plants flame into bloom. This ocotillo will flower any time of the year if it gets enough moisture. These spikes are not cactus spines, but are the sharp stalks left after the green leaves fall. A cactus wren announces the joy of the desert spring and new life among the thorns of the ocotillo. Hummingbirds and butterflies relish the nectar from the ocotillo's tubular flowers. The hummingbird's beak is long and fine to reach deep into the heart of the flower. The verdin, a type of bush tit, has no thin and probing beak. It must nip a small hole near the base of the flower to get to the nectar directly. It provides the hummingbird with a choice of two entrances to the ocotillo's heart. The succulent green shoots, the blazing flowers, disappear almost as quickly as they appeared. Life in the desert soon returns to dry normality. As the shadows lengthen once again across the dunes, a kangaroo rat stirs from its daytime slumber. Life after dark in the Mojave isn't all red in tooth and claw. A spot of fastidious grooming on its fine tail, and the kangaroo rat is ready for the night. First, it eats the seeds stored in its entrance burrow. The dry seeds absorbed moisture from the rodent's breath as it slept. By eating them, the kangaroo rat recycles most of the moisture lost during its day of sleep. It is so well adapted to the desert that it doesn't ever need to drink water. Once outside in the moonlit desert, the kangaroo rat relies on speed and agility to escape predators, owls and coyotes. It's easy to see how it gets its name. Kangaroo rats are highly territorial. Any intruder finds itself quickly chased away from the entrance to the burrow. By necessity, they must jealously guard their larders of stored seeds. A full larder may mean the difference between life and death. In the Joshua tree above the kangaroo rat's burrow, one of the most remarkable acts of interdependence between the plant and animal kingdoms is taking place this desert evening. The rains brought the Joshua tree to flower, and inside the flowers there lives a moth found nowhere else on Earth. The female Joshua tree yucca moth collects pollen in her specially adapted mouth. Then she flies off to a different flower that she fertilizes with the pollen she carries. She cannot feed. As an individual, she gets nothing from the transaction. With a long tube called an ovipositor, she injects her eggs inside a flower's developing ovary. In the protection of the ripened ovary, the eggs will hatch into larvae with a built-in food supply of seeds. And enough moth-fertilized seeds will remain uneaten to ensure new generations of Joshua trees. This tiny moth has shaped the characteristic landscape of the Mojave Desert. The ripening pods will soon shed their seed, and the Joshua tree may not bloom until it rains again, maybe next year, maybe several years from now. The roadrunners had nested in this cholla cactus. Their clutch is successful, the survival of the chicks assured by the bounty of insects and small animals the rain has brought. roadrunner's diet is mainly lizards and snakes. Most carnivorous animals of the desert eat lizards, which are a plentiful source of both protein and moisture. The chicks are now 2 weeks old, still ungainly and partly feathered. The parents feed their chicks on anything they can catch. The lizards are getting larger. It's the ground squirrel's role in life to become lunch for other animals. Most nests have chicks of various ages, and older hatchlings more aggressively demand food. But this large young ground squirrel is at about the limit of what they can cope with. If the younger chicks weaken and food is in short supply, they will be eaten by parents or older chicks in the desert's harsh provision for survival. Brief rains bring new life to much of the desert. But there are places in the Mojave where no amount of water can bring flowers to the land. In the northern part of the desert is Death Valley. No better name could be found for this salty, desiccated basin. Here lies a dry, menacing land where mysterious rocks appear to move about by themselves. Temperatures reach 120 degrees or more. There is a scaly and lizard-like look to the place. Several thousand years ago, this was a huge lake. Dotted around the valley floor, a handful of tiny springs still bring up water, incredibly salty and bitter to the taste. In one of these little pools, a water pipit looks for brine flies. Surprisingly, many of these pools have fish in them. These desert pupfish are some of the rarest animals in the world. Some species have already become extinct as their tiny pools have dwindled to nothing. These fish have the ability to survive temperatures of 100 degrees in water 6 times saltier than the sea. Underground streams and springs feed the bubbling pools. Salts form by rapid evaporation in the bone-dry air. The most famous and the most threatened species of pupfish is found only at Devil's Hole. These fish have federal protection as an endangered species, but heavy irrigating on nearby farms has drastically depleted the natural underground reservoirs that feed the springs. Drawn down by so many feet, these water levels can never be restored. Limited light now reaches the water in Devil's Hole, and there's minimal plant growth. Owls that roost above and drop their pellets into the water unwittingly provide these little fish with almost their only source of nourishment. Water is, and always has been, the key to the survival of everything in the desert, plant and animal. The tiny amount that glittered on the surface lured cattlemen to introduce grazing stock into this basically unsuitable environment. Wild grazing animals cannot compete with stock for food. They have been displaced, pushed into back corners of the desert where domestic animals cannot reach. But many animals which are disturbed cannot move on. There is nowhere else to go. Desert bighorns gather during the summer around the few remaining permanent sources of water. Unlike their close relations high in the Rocky Mountains, these desert dwellers rarely clash horns, as if conditions here are too severe for such a waste of energy. Like the desert tortoise, the bighorn exists on plants and doesn't drink water during most of the year. Only during the mating and breeding season do they need to drink. These wild sheep eat very little of any one plant, while the domestic stock trample and eat plants down to the ground. the bare soil can easily become eroded. Donkeys, left to run wild by the early prospectors, are as destructive as domestic cattle, trampling vegetation completely, fouling waterholes, and driving away the shy bighorns. They're remarkably resilient, and even this lame foal will probably survive. Man has made and continues to make his mark all over the Mojave. Today's boom in mining is much greater than it was in the 1800s. 17 tons of ore have to be crushed to get 1 ounce of gold, leaving huge pits and high heaps. The search for hidden riches is a recurring refrain in the desert. Whatever modern man is looking for in the desert, he has usually tried to find it by adapting the desert to his lifestyle rather than by adapting his life to the desert. People can have their green lawns and gushing fountains here, but at a price. The drain on the desert's dwindling supply of water is tremendous. The lawns can only exist here because of continuous watering. They're the flamboyant outward signs of a growing population making demands on a scarce resource that will be impossible to sustain. Where watering stops, the desert abruptly begins again, and so does its wildlife. The roadrunner's chicks, now out of the nest, pester their parents for food. Already almost as large as their parents, within a few weeks they will be completely independent, once they've mastered the art of catching their own food. At this stage, the parents try to catch food within sight of the chicks so they can watch and learn how to do it. But another native bird flourishes dangerously on the growing presence of people in the desert. Raven populations have burgeoned with these new food supplies, but the damage to other wildlife is extreme.
There are ravens now building up in numbers. We don't know what they're doing to the lizard and snake populations. We know they are severely impacting the tortoise by killing baby tortoises.
Tiny, empty tortoise shells litter raven nests. In some areas, all of the tortoise babies appear to have been killed.
People see ravens go over. They're a natural part of the system out here, but their numbers have increased so greatly because of human garbage in the desert. They are creating a very severe impact. The numbers are just way above what the desert, I think, can tolerate.
While ravens have increased 15-fold in the last 20 years, the tortoise population here has been halved. In order for these ancient reptiles to survive, a sensitive decision to control the number of ravens must be taken.
The tortoise is a good indicator, I think, of what's happening, because the tortoise is in serious trouble now, particularly in the western desert. And I look upon the tortoise as telling us that the general ecosystem as a whole is going downhill fast.
These rival male tortoises face a more immediate threat from each other. Once on its back, the loser in this conflict will quickly perish in the sun unless it can right itself. This one did manage to get back onto its feet. But fights like these spread a new threat to the desert tortoise, a respiratory disease, which may be one sign of the overall deterioration of this part of the desert. Food chains in the desert are short, and what affects one species affects another in an immediate way. Burrowing owls rely heavily on old tortoise burrows for their nest sites. Fewer tortoises, fewer old burrows. The female owl waits at the entrance to the burrow while her mate brings her food as a courtship gesture. Dune crickets, grasshoppers, and other succulent insects. These small owls are swift hunters. They stamp on unwary insects or fly in a low-level attack, seizing their prey in their talons while still in flight. Even if the pair raises chicks in this burrow this year, next year their burrow may no longer exist. As well as a place to live and a place to exploit, the Mojave is also a place for harnessing untapped and available energy, wind and solar power. Solar power may help solve some of our pressing current and future energy requirements. On the face of it, solar energy is pollution-free and safe. The sun's rays are concentrated by the reflectors and boil water that drives the turbines that produce the electricity. But to make significant impact on our dependence on fossil fuels, much surviving wilderness would be bisected, disturbed, and destroyed. It's a self-renewing system that may ultimately prove destructive. But a true self-renewing system has been played out in the surrounding desert for many thousands of years, and it makes human efforts seem crude in comparison. The phenopepla, a type of flycatcher with its red eye and black crest, is a handsome desert bird. The bird feeds almost exclusively on the berries of the parasitic mistletoe that hangs in the desert mesquite. The chicks are fed on the berries that are produced from the parent's crop in a seemingly never-ending stream, like a magician performing a conjuring trick. It seems impossible that either the parents or the chicks have the capacity for this volume of berries. Each berry contains a large seed that passes through the bird's digestive tract unaltered. As the droppings fall onto the branches of the mesquite, the seeds stick to the bark. When they sprout, they send their parasitic root into the wood of the host tree. The phenopepla, in effect, sows its own vegetable garden. Like many other species of desert animal, the phoenicopla has struck a balance. The bird and the mistletoe depend equally on each other.
I sometimes wonder why I am so driven to work toward the protection of natural living systems. I think it's simply because I have such a tremendous feeling, a real reverence for life, the living system, and I know many people so enjoy nature, and many more are coming to enjoy nature. I think about people now and far into the future. We just must not trash this wonderful planet.
In recent years, the value of the Earth's remaining wild places has been recognized. Pressure is growing to give surviving unspoiled areas of the Mojave national park status, and to create many more protected wilderness areas in the desert. The challenge is clear. There must be a balance between the demands of 35 million people in the ever-growing cities of the American Southwest and the now clearly understood needs of a complex and fragile desert whose survival as a wilderness means that man must agree not to penetrate vast areas. They must be left alone just to be. And by just being, they add something to the human spirit.